It was the day of July 18th, 1974, and for the most part a normal day at Disneyland. As park goers enjoy their day, they are drawn to the America Sings attraction. The attraction featured animatronics on constantly rotating stages, and the audience would watch in awe and admire the marvel of engineering that was this attraction. But on this day, tragedy would strike. The attraction just opened, and Deborah Gale Stone, an 18-year-old woman from Santa Ana, had the honors of being the hostess. Her job was to greet people as they entered the attraction and were seated. At 11 p.m. that evening, Stone had approached too closely to the area in which the stages rotated and was horrifically crushed between the walls. This incident was horrifying and should have never occurred. Daniel Robinson, 33, a member of the Air Force from Castle Air Force Base near Merced, was sitting with his family in the front row of an adjoining theater. He told investigators he looked to his right, saw what he thought was a child being pulled between the platform and wall, and heard a scream. When the platform stopped, he said he notified operators. At this point in time, Stone was the first ever employee to be killed in Disneyland in its 19-year history. However, this wasn't the first death in Disneyland, as there were other accidents we will get into. Hello everybody, Yuno here, and welcome back to another chilling video. And today we are going to go over when Disney gets dark and disturbing, downright scary even. Since its inception, Disney has been the hallmark of family-friendly entertainment and children's media, but just like all things, not everything can be sunshine and rainbows. From deaths to unsettling media to even creepypasta, Disney is the spawn of many things unnerving, and that's what we are going to get into today. But before we get into that, I just want to mention that if you liked the video you see here today, it would help out a lot if you left a like and a comment below. And hey, maybe even subscribe. But without further ado, let's get into the video. The death of Deborah Gale Stone, while tragic, is only one of many deaths at Disneyland to this point. Yeah, there are more. Somehow this is a topic that is as extensive as it is disturbing, and we are going to go into quite a few cases here, so brace yourself, because we're going to speedrun them. Here we go. March 17th, 1981, a fight broke out in the parking lot of a Disneyland nearby Tomorrowland. After an 18-year-old allegedly pinched a 28-year-old man's girlfriend, the 18-year-old male was then stabbed fatally within the park premises. Following this incident, the park was found negligent for not summoning outside medical help, and the family of the victim was awarded $600,000 in compensation. September 14th, 1985, a 7-year-old girl was enjoying her trip at Disneyland, coming all the way from California for this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, unfortunately, while walking across the parking lot with her uncle, and they were looking for her uncle's car, she had fallen right underneath the path of a charter bus that then proceeded to crush her to death. When paramedics arrived at the scene, it was far too late. She was already pronounced dead. On September 5th, 2003, the popular roller coaster at Disneyland called Big Thunder Mountain had tragically derailed from its course while in operation due to improper maintenance. After entering a tunnel on a ride, the cart flew into the air, hitting the ceiling and then coming down onto the first passenger car, landing right on top, injuring 10 passengers and fatally killing one 22-year-old man. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma. In January of 1984, tragedy struck the Matterhorn ride, as a 48-year-old woman was riding on one of the bobsleds. However, it was later found out her seatbelt was unbuckled. Whether it was park negligence or her unbuckling it herself has been undetermined. Horrifically, she was thrown off the bobsled into the course of another oncoming bobsled. Head on, she was decapitated, killing her instantly. In October of 2000, the worst happened. Nightmare became reality on the Roger Rabbit's cartoon spin when a 4-year-old boy fell out of the ride and was then dragged underneath the car. He suffered internal injuries, brain damage, and cardiac arrest. He died from these injuries 9 years later. Disney was held liable for his death as they had failed to call emergency services in a timely manner. As you can see from these examples, for many people who have gone to the happiest place on earth, it had unfortunately turned into the worst. Since 1955, 26 deaths had been attributed to the popular theme park, Just goes to show that even at a magical place like Disney World, it can get horrific and tragedy can strike any time. Now, I debated including conspiracy theories in this video, however I feel like it just fits here and could be a topic of further discussion in the future. There are numerous chilling and iconic conspiracy theories relating to the titular brand of Disney, and I guess no place is better to start than here. The most popular and famous Disney conspiracy theory is the idea that Walt Disney's head was cryogenically frozen after he had passed. As the story goes, when he had passed in 1996, his head, or even his full body, was cryogenically frozen, so that later in the future when the technology to bring him back was available, he would make his return. While a wild theory in concept, it is not unheard of. However, there is no evidence to support that Walt had this done to him, so for now it is just speculation. Another popular conspiracy theory is that no one is allowed to die at Disney parks. However, as we have discussed earlier, this is untrue, but as the rumor goes, Disney is so protective of its image at its Disneyland resort locations that they will transport dead people or dying people off of the property to ensure no one will be declared dead at a Disneyland park. If this were true, it would be deeply disturbing and inhumane. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. Another popular theory, however one that there isn't much to go on or not much to talk about, is the idea that there are mazes and labyrinths of tunnels hidden underneath Disneyland. Now, I would like to go into a lot more, however I feel like we would be talking more about media rather than the brand itself, and so I will save that for another video if you guys would like to see it. Now, I'm no stranger to talking about creepypastas on this channel whenever I get the chance. It's just a special interest of mine. And when given the idea of this video, I could not miss the chance to go over some iconic Disney-related creepypastas. So without further ado, let's begin. Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real, live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact, look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yes, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate. And there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of their story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it obviously wasn't because of foreigners or lazy. Both are convenient excuses. No, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace in the center of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story, The Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you know it as the Disney cartoon from decades past. Mowgli is an abandoned child in the jungle, essentially raised by animals and simultaneously threatened/pursued by other animals. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned, with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project, knowing full well what was going on. People started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was a concept art. A group of stuffed shirts from Disney Corporation actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be for everyone. When they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace, surrounded by jungle, stacked with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace, jungle, and loincloths, not only in the center of a relatively wealth area, but also somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation boards over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local venues came into play and their options turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas. Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete. Visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was pretty hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want this in the first place. I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing it closed over a decade ago. I live maybe 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so really I only heard the rumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read this article from someone who'd explored the Treasure Island Resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind. Things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by the disgruntled former employees who had lost their jobs. Hell, the locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there felt just as angry about Treasure Island as folks here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, what I'm getting at is this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though many years had passed since its closing, I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experience, and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. I'm not going to say I wasted no time in getting there, because honestly it took me another year after I first found that Treasure Island article to get around to going up to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather I tried to. Naturally, no official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place, that had been scrubbed clean. Even odder, however, was that nobody before myself had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photo. None of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they all had swung Disney's way. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know? Recently, I learned that corporations can actually ask Google, for example, to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather their words were made inaccessible. So in the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an old-as-hell map I'd received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent out to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess since I had been there in the late 80s, that was recent. I didn't really intend to hang on to it, it just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I had only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the strange bin my parents had shoved it all into. But I did find it. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach in recent years, or old residents who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to say, "Where would I find Mowgli's?" The drive took me through an inordinately long corridor of overgrowth. Tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area mixed with the native species of flora that actually belonged there and had tried to reclaim the land. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. Tremendous, monolithic wooden gates whose supports to either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The gate itself has been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney." Clearly the handiwork of some past local or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open enough to walk through, but not drive, so grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off, on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood unattended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants similarly stood in their own stinking bug-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All that remained of any outdoor structures were broken, rotting wood and various charred bits of unidentifiable material. What was most likely an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by past vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin as bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur, and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they had been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, or the gaping maw where they had been, someone had once again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding off the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was, as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances in space. No expenses spared. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer, not even remotely cool now, had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting go, but within seconds it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island Resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about a half-inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks and the bidets in the ladies' room, yes, I went there, all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut the water off long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but naturally I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything there. I thought there was actually a television or radio in one room, as I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out. Though it was like a whisper, probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on the mind. This is what it sounded like. I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. Your father told you. I know, that sounds ridiculous. I'm just telling you what I experienced, why I thought there might have been something running in that room, or worse, some vagrants who had holed up there, and probably who would have knifed me. At the front doors of the palace again, I figured I hadn't found anything of note and had wasted the trip up. As I looked out the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would give me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo, then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get detail of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned and slithered off the pedestal across the grass and into the trees. All 80 feet of it, its head long disappeared into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the ground. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at Treasure Isle, and I should have known they'd done this. I was dumbfounded, just utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back toward the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I looked for a place to sit down, as my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass and dead leaf carpet or haul myself up onto a desk of questionably reliability. I had been some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was far enough away from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off the wall, once again painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd become accustomed to. I placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to at least keep somewhat clean. The stairway led downward below ground level. Using my camera flash as a sort of improvised flashlight, I could see what the staircase ended in a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign on the door, a real sign, read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or wantonly steal. I had come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall, something nobody else had apparently thought of or hadn't been able to do at the time. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pins. There were clocks, even a punch-in clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old, static-filled television and a long, rotted-out food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalypse movies where everything is left in a state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots-only area, the sights just became more and more interesting. As I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melted with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real rotting crimson floor covering. Everything was just sort of squishy. Anything wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing items hanging on hooks in one of the rooms simply fell to moist threads if I tried to unhook them. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dark, suffocating depths of the palace. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is, until I gave up and started to walk away. That was when there was a slight popping sound, and at the door, it creaked open slowly. Inside, the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like the rest I had passed. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to just keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it would reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. What I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike any other costumes, it was lying on its back in the center of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, creating bare patches. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be and white where white should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces, some with plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. Just one of the bedraggled character heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the mascot head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. I dropped the Donald Duck immediately, as you'd expect, and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, I had to. For any number of reasons that may seem silly, but only if you don't think it through. I need proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. And that's when Mickey, that photo-negative opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet, the Mickey Mouse costume, or whoever was inside of it, stood there at the center of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No," over and over. With shaking hands, a violently thrashing heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera's screen displayed only dead pixels in the shape of the thing. It was a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the dead pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved to. Then the camera died, went blank and quiet, and broken. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume. "Hey," it said in a hushed, perverted, but perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice. "Want to see my head come off?" It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements, similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood. So much thick, chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. Only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of the room, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of the camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity if not my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anyone like that getting out. I work in security at Disney World, the happiest place on earth. Typically, I wouldn't say where I work, as obviously there are some pretty strict rules about things employees can put online. But I just don't think I can tell this properly without that context, and honestly, I think this may be it for me anyway with this job. I just can't see myself working here any longer now. I've been with the company for 23 years. The first 20 years I worked in the parks, nabbing shoplifters and rounding up people who were drinking too much for the heat. Occasionally there'd be a fight to break up, but people usually kept it pretty mild. The heat and walking were getting too much for me the last few years, so I asked to be transferred somewhere with air conditioning, and the company moved me to one of their resorts. While the working conditions were 110% better as far as climate and comfort go, the guest issues were trickier. Mainly domestics. I guess the expensive and stress of vacation got to a lot of people, and I'd be called by neighboring rooms because some mom and dad were yelling at each other. I'd try to suggest they take a nap or go do separate activities for a bit, and that would usually calm them down. But none of that is what I'm here for. I've got to get this out while I still have time. 3 days ago, I got a call from management. Apparently a couple of days before that, housekeeping had gone into a room that should have been turned over that day. Turned over is when one guest leaves by about 11 a.m. and the next guest checks in around 3 p.m. And all of the guests' items were still in the room. Housekeeping made a note of it and moved on, but during the next 2 days when they entered the room, everything was still there and untouched. I went to check it out, and sure enough, there was an empty room full of luggage, clothes, snacks, some toys, everything a family would need for a vacation. The manager had already looked up the previous reservation, and it was for a family. Dad, Mom, 2 little kids. I tried to call the phone numbers they had given, but all I got was voicemail. We were a bit stumped, so I made the call that the housekeeper could clean the room and take the family's personal items to be held until we got in contact with someone. I went digging into the reservation more. The family had arrived 5 days before housekeeping discovered all of their stuff. I found that the family had paid a parking fee and their vehicle description was listed. A quick walk of the parking lots and I had easily located their vehicle, so that ruled out a car accident or them deciding to leave all their stuff behind. Next, I saw that they had bought a dining plan. This is when a guest prepays for all of their food. They're given a certain number of credits to use for meals. This family had only used 3 credits, and the last one was 2 days after they had checked in. It appeared that the day they arrived, they got here late and probably just stayed on the resort. The next day, they used 2 credits at Epcot. The second park day, they used just 1 credit at the Magic Kingdom, and it was at breakfast time. Now at Disney, we have something called magic bands. Magic bands are worn by the guests and act as a room key, park ticket, credit card, dining reservation payment, fast pass, a system used to bypass lines, and more. It took some work, but I was finally able to look up this family's fast pass history. The day they went to the Magic Kingdom, they had breakfast at a restaurant in the park, rode a couple of rides, and then rode their last ride, It's a Small World, around 11 a.m., then nothing. Finally, it was time to bring in someone else on this. I called an old coworker at the Magic Kingdom and asked him to pull security footage for It's a Small World at the time they wrote it, and I made my way over there. When I got there, my friend was very confused, almost distraught looking. He showed me what he found. There's usually a camera in the direction of where rides load and unload. The footage showed them scanning their bands to use fast passes for the ride and boarding the ride. The footage from the exit of the ride just showed the other people in the car exiting. They weren't there. Of course, we thought the worst. Maybe one of the kids had fallen out and mom and dad and the other kid got off in the middle of the ride to help and they all got injured or killed or stuck in machinery somewhere. So we shut down the ride, middle of the damn day, turned off that earworm music and turned up the lights. My buddy and I walked that ride 3 times before we called in help. Eventually there was close to 10 cast members searching, and we didn't find shit except for 3 cell phones and a hat. I was right stumped. I've kept digging the past couple of days, and I'm not sure who to tell what I found next to. I've called the police, and I suppose they're on the way, but the company has a way of covering up things like this, and I decide I can't live with myself. I don't put out some type of warning. I kept digging into their reservation over the last couple of days, and today I noticed they had purchased Memory Maker. There are photographers all over the parks and cameras in a lot of the rides, and with Memory Maker, the photos are all free. They automatically get added to a guest's Disney account when the system knows their picture has been taken, and the system always knows. Everyone's whereabouts are always known with the magic bands. Well, I opened up their Memory Maker photo album, and I swear there are 732 pictures. The first 30 or so are pretty normal, Epcot, a few rides in front of the castle, but the rest are all in It's a Small World. The rides only take 1 picture per go-round, so it appears as though this family had ridden this ride over 700 times. The first picture looked pretty normal, everyone looked happy. It was a busy day and we had a full car of guests. The next one is rough to look at. The car is empty except for this little family, and they look so darn confused. The next 10 to 15, I can see Dad is getting angry, yelling. Mom is holding on to her 2 kids like her life depends on it. And you can see the kids getting increasingly upset, crying, and it goes on and on and on. After 50 or so, it looks like they're trying to get out. In one, the dad is missing. In another, they're all gone. Maybe like they've bailed early in the ride and tried to walk out. But in the very next one, they're all right back in that damn car. After around 450 or so, I only see the mom and kids. It's just when I look closely, I can see Dad, maybe just his body now, slumped down in one of the other seats. Since about 675, there's just mom and 1 kid, another body in another seat. The mom and kid aren't moving anymore. I think they're still alive, just near calm, catatonic, looking straight ahead, pale. And y'all, I swear on my life, the dolls are moving or something. In some of these pictures, I can tell they aren't where they should be. I even saw one with a doll in the car with this family. I can't look anymore, or I'm going to lose my lunch. I closed the album. Its file size has increased since I closed it. God, are there new pictures being added? I see on security cameras that the local police department just arrived, so they'll take over soon. I wish I knew what is going on, but I also wish this damn thing had never landed in my lap. I don't think I'll be able to update this after I talk to the police. I think I'm going to walk out of here and never come back. I just wanted to get this out there before Disney feeds the media some lies to cover up the reasons behind why a whole family vanished. Because they didn't vanish. I know exactly where they are. Well, this video turned out way longer than I was expecting, so I hope you guys stuck through all the way. Is your childhood ruined yet? But to keep things short, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like down below and comment if you want to see more like this. And hey, maybe even subscribe. With that out of the way, have a wonderful day.